Welcome to Bigfoot Society. If you have Bigfoot activity to report from the same areas discussed in this episode, please reach out to me directly after this episode. And if you'd like to be on the podcast to discuss a personal Bigfoot encounter, please reach out to me directly at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Do you wish there was more Bigfoot Society to listen to every week? Well, there is now. If you become a supporting member over at Patreon, you get a special members-only episode every single week on Wednesdays, and sometimes even more episodes. Head on over to patreon.com/The Bigfoot Society. And now let's get on with the show. All right, Bigfoot Society, you've got the privilege of talking to Mr. Donn Clarius today. Donn is an individual that had shared a very interesting interaction Bigfoot-wise in my Facebook group, which is Bigfoot Sightings and Research, I believe is the name of it. And so I reached out to Donn and asked if he wanted to come on the show to share what he's experienced. And thankfully he said yes. So Donn, welcome to the show today. How's it going, man?
Glad to be here, Jeremiah.
Absolutely. You know, we've got some really interesting ground to cover. So I would say, you know, feel free to take us, I guess we're going all the way back to the late 1950s, and feel free to share how this all started for you.
Well, I had just seen the great B movie, Snowman of the Himalayas, or whatever it was called. Abominable Snowman, that's it. And I thought it was all imaginary. And in 1958, I was listening to the radio in New York City where I live late night. I think I'm 9 years old. And I heard Jerry Crew being interviewed on the radio. Now, Jerry Crew had been working on a logging road in Bluff Creek, California, which is the extreme northwest portion of California. And they were building a logging road that paralleled Bluff Creek. And all of a sudden in the morning, this incredibly heavy equipment was tossed around as though it had toys. And scattered around the camp were these enormous barefoot human footprints, but much, much larger than humans. And that's where the nickname Bigfoot came out. And, of course, the real name is Sasquatch. But I was just utterly intrigued. And 12 years later, I was going to school in California, and I thought, well, for spring break, why don't I go to the spot where 2.5 years earlier, the Patterson-Gimlin film had been taken. And on the Patterson-Gimlin film, there's a moment where Patty, that's what we call the Sasquatch, turns over her shoulder and looks. And at that moment, you can see the spot where my friend and I camped. It was at the edge of...
Oh, Donn, are you still there?
Yes.
Okay, great. I thought we had lost you there for a second. Last thing I heard was we had the area where you and your friend had camped at.
Right. Well, we did our homework, and we did a lot of research. You know, we found that Sasquatch are subspecies of humans. You know, Denisovans, Neanderthal, Homo sapiens, and Sasquatch just happen to be covered with hair. And so they have the intelligence of a human, but also the senses of an animal. And their sense of smell is tremendous. It's like 100-fold what ours is. And we did our research, and we found that any group that had guns did not encounter Sasquatch except Roger Patterson and Gimlin, because they had horses, and the smell of the horses overpowered the smell of the gun. And that's the only reason in our research that's why they encountered Sasquatch. Now, we were driven up to Bluff Creek. The logging road is parallel to Bluff Creek, about a mile west. And at one point, we saw the sign Bigfoot Creek. So that's where our driver dropped us off. Now, it took us 4 days to hike that 1 mile. which is incredible because it's so thick. In fact, world explorers called that part of the forest virtually impenetrable. And, our friends knew that we believed in Sasquatch, and I'm from New York City, and they warned me, it's going to be spring. There's going to be a lot of animal sounds, and don't go jumping to conclusions the first time you hear a raccoon. Well, we heard absolutely nothing for 4 days. Total silence, and that spooked us. And yet, it didn't occur to us that that's one of the warning signs that Sasquatch are in the area. And so, on the fourth day, late in the fourth day, we heard the rapids of Bluff Creek up ahead. Now, we were blazing our own trail for those almost 4 miles, and about maybe 1,000 yards west of Bluff Creek, now we're on a game trail. And soon I heard a sound behind me on the game trail. Now, after 4 days of total silence, that's startling. So I turned to look, thinking maybe I'd see a Boy Scout or something. I wasn't thinking clearly. That all I could see was the trunk of a tree about the thickness of a human arm, vibrating back and forth as though a huge bird had just taken off, except there was no huge bird, and I just didn't think anything of it. So then we got to Bluff Creek. There was a sandbar, and that was my first time backpacking. But my partner, he was an experienced woodsman, and we had no guns, but he was an expert archer, so we had his high-tech bow and arrow. But we didn't see any Sasquatch tracks at the sandbar, so we camped in a place maybe 200 yards, maybe 300 yards downwind from it, so that the animals would not tell us we were there by smell. But for 3 days, we had heard absolutely nothing. And there was a swimming hole maybe 200 yards east of our campsite. And I was wading in the pool. And Ken, who's a really solid, fearless, that's the word, fearless outdoorsman, he comes to me and there's a look on his face that I've never seen before. And he said to me, Don, I don't like where we're camped, too susceptible to flash floods. Well, that time of year, the chance of flash flood is absolute zero. And Ken knew that. But I could see that something at camp had spooked him. And Ken is the kind of person who would not want to talk about it. So I asked Ken, it's, what is it now, 4:15? How long do you think it's going to take us to break camp and move out? And he said, well, he did some figuring in his head, and he realized what my point was that we don't have time to find a new campsite before it turns dark. So he said, first thing in the morning, we're getting out of here. So it really gets dark in a hurry in that area, Bluff Creek Canyon. And so we just finished dinner. We're sitting on a log facing the forest and the campfire, and we hear a heavy animal approaching down the game trail. Now this is, again, startling because we've now had 6 days of total silence, and to hear an animal, it was walking purposely and without hesitation. So this is an animal that apparently can see in the dark. And I'm a musician, and I can estimate by the sound of the branches being crushed under its feet, maybe 4 or 5 inch branches, and that's a heavy animal. And so I shone my flashlight up to see how big was the bear, and that's not what I saw. If only I had seen a bear. 8 feet or so off the ground were 2 red eyes reflecting the light. That means that this animal can see in the dark. And it's 8 feet above the ground, which means we went to all this trouble to encounter Sasquatch, and now that we're face to face with him, less than 10 feet away, we are scared to death. We were absolutely hysterical. and it circled our camp maybe 45 minutes, always at its sight. Not that we wanted to see it. I mean, this is the odd thing. You know, we went to all that trouble, did all that research so that we could encounter Sasquatch, and now that we have, we are terrified, utterly terrified. And about 45 minutes later, it picked up a rock about the size of a human fist and threw it at our feet. Excellent aim. And I don't know how I got to sleep that night because all my thoughts were Albert Ostman. Albert Ostman had lived. He was an outdoorsman and a miner, and he went camping in the 1920s. And he was actually carried off in a sleeping bag by a Sasquatch at night and taken to the Sasquatch family. And it took him 3 days before he could get away. But that's all that went through my mind. So in the morning when we woke up, we were just relieved to still be where we went to sleep. And I had promised Ken that we would promptly move on, but I wanted to get photographs of the footprints, and of course the soil was so soft, there were no discernible footprints except they were these huge gouges, maybe a foot and a half long, and it was rather than go back the way we had come, which took us 4 days, we decided to walk downstream, and our maps showed that there was a spur from the logging road that intersected Bluff Creek, maybe 2 miles further south. That's where we headed. But all along, we could tell that the Sasquatch was following us, not nearly as close as it had encountered us, that was 10 feet, but we were aware that it is following us to ensure that we leave its domain. It was an absolutely terrifying experience, but it was a privilege. Now that I'm looking back at it, it was really a rare privilege.
Don, that's an incredible account. Thank you for sharing that. I definitely have a few questions for you about this whole ordeal.
Okay.
So everything, the interaction, did you say that happened at the film site itself, or that was a different area?
That was the film site itself.
Okay, and that was 1970?
Oh, yeah. Spring of 1970, I think it was April.
Okay, April 1970. Wow, interesting. So and this is just approximately, so you hiked up Bigfoot Creek to Bluff Creek. How many miles would you say then you had to walk to get up to the film site from when you found Bluff Creek?
Well, it was about a mile. We didn't actually walk at Bluff Creek. We did not walk at along Bigfoot Creek. We walked. We blazed our own trail just south of Bigfoot Creek, and it was only a mile, and it took us 4 days.
Okay, so you did not get dropped off at Bigfoot Creek. It was a different area.
Yeah, we were dropped off at Bigfoot Creek where it intersects the logging road.
Okay, gotcha. And you said so that was about a mile to get to the film site from where that was.
Right.
Okay. Very, very interesting. How did you end up finding where that actual film site was, or was it a thing where you just recognized it once you hiked up there?
We recognized the terrain. Now this flash was, 2.5 years. A lot of it changed, but there were certain things at the forest and the rock formations, and it was actually rather easy to find. The fact that it was Bigfoot Creek indicated that this is the spot.
Yeah, I mean that's a just the name of it. Yeah, it kind of makes you wonder for sure. Were there any things about the film site that jumped out that you saw? You were like, okay, I see that, and I see that. This has to be the place. Well,
the larger boulders were still there. The smaller stones. Of course, when the floods come every spring, they get washed away. And subsequent to that trip, I have seen several film crews travel to the spot, and it was the same spot.
Do you know what film crews those would have been?
Finding Bigfoot, and I cannot think of the names.
I got it. Yeah, so you're saying in later years you saw other people traveling to that area, and you're like, yeah, it's the same area.
Yes.
So, gotcha. Okay.
I left off the end of my story. We got down to the this is 2 days after our encounter, so we're now at the junction of the spur from the logging road where it empties into Bluff Creek, and apparently they built the spur because they had bulldozed so many tree stumps that they were needed a spur to dump them into Bluff Creek. And so there's this 200-foot or so sheer, not quite a cliff, but maybe a 45-degree angle, and it's loose soil and gravel and all of that. And it took us, we climbed. We each had a 15-pound backpack, which didn't make it easy. But for every three steps we climbed, we'd slide back too. So by the time we got to the top, we were so out of breath. We collapsed on a log and just to catch our breath, and soon heard an enormous crash, like an elephant had fallen out of a tree. And then we heard this strange gurgling whistle, like a bird only 2 or 3 octaves in pitch below. And I had never heard anything like that before, and I didn't hear it again until I heard a recording of the sound of Bigfoot made on a trail cam, and it was the same, and it just brought chills. This was years later, but it was an experience I'll never forget.
That is extremely interesting. Did you guys bring any, anything with you to try to document what you might find, or is it purely for the adventure to try to get to the spot?
Well, I had a camera. Now, my theory is that Sasquatch sense of smell is like 100-fold what a human's is. That electronic cameras and guns give off smells that humans cannot detect, but a Sasquatch can. So we limited the equipment we took. The only thing I had was a 35-millimeter still camera, and I had that wrapped buried into my backpack so that it cut down the amount of smell.
I'm guessing there was no photos that were able to be taken, anything like that, like what would have been taken just a few years beforehand.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
The only photo we took was the campsite and some of the hiking. But we had no movie camera or video camera.
Okay, so that...
Actually, there were no video. There were no consumer video cameras in 1970.
Correct, from what I know. So you took a photo, though, of the campsite that was at the film site, you're saying?
Correct.
Do you still have that photo?
I don't think so. I had some things stolen, and that unfortunately was one of them.
Interesting. Did you take or bring back anything from that trip as a souvenir or anything?
No.
Okay. It's very interesting. It'd be one of the first documented trips to that area besides Roger and Bob.
Right.
Was
Right.
that so how did that affect the rest of your life then, having that, that nighttime sighting, and that really must have affected you in some ways?
Yes, it made me obsessed with, as though I wasn't already obsessed. It actually increased my obsession to the point where I'm now a documentary filmmaker, and I cannot afford to pay the copyright fees. So my documentaries cannot be sold. And what I do is edit together interviews and reenactments of other encounters.
Oh, okay. Interesting. So is this like a YouTube thing, or what's the type of medium here?
Oh, I can't put them on YouTube because of the copyright.
Oh, right. Yeah, sure. Wow. So right now you just have a bunch. It sounds like you have probably multiple documentaries that you're really not even able to put out there.
Right. Now I can show them to individuals, but not for broadcast or sale.
Okay. So are these interviews that you filmed yourself of people that have had encounters, or they're of other people's work?
I get them from other sources.
Okay. Gotcha. If you could go back,
the other,
go ahead.
The other sources have more clout than I do. I'm just a person. I'm in my mid 70s, and people do not take me seriously. But there are Sasquatch researchers out there who have clout, credibility, and gravitas, for lack of a better word, and they get the interviews.
Do you have contact with any of the other individuals that were with you during that trip?
No, I've lost touch with them.
Okay.
This is 55 years ago.
Wow. And just to make sure, so when you were hiking, were you hiking alongside of Bluff Creek or hiking in the creek itself?
Okay, if you can picture two parallel lines up and down. The one on the right is Bluff Creek water. The one on the left is the logging road. And we were going left to right, as in an H. So we were blazing our own trail. And then after our encounter, we went down along Bluff Creek, in the water, but next to the water.
Okay, gotcha. Were there any times where it was, or how about this? What was the difficulty level of hiking alongside Bluff Creek when you guys went on the return?
Extreme, because there were rocks and driftwood, and we were carrying 50-pound backpacks. Now, there were trip hazards all over the place. And when we went from the logging road to the camp, to the site, we would encounter fallen trees. So we either had to climb over them, and they were enormous trees. Either climb over them or crawl under them. Either way, the backpacks came off. That really slowed us down. But when we were after the encounter, when we were hiking down Bluff Creek, there were no fallen trees that we needed to climb over or crawl under. So we would just need to walk very slowly and carefully to avoid tripping.
So after you had this encounter by the film site, what was the first thing you did when you got back to civilization?
Well, we were both embarrassed that we had gotten hysterical, and so we didn't talk about that. But we talked openly about the fact that we encountered Sasquatch, and a lot of folks gave us the impression that they believed us. And for all I know, perhaps they were all bluffing or just humoring us. or perhaps they actually believed us. But there is so much disbelief when it comes to Sasquatch, and the evidence is utterly overwhelming that Sasquatch do exist. And experts estimate that the breeding population is maybe 3,000.
So these people that you were talking to, were these just people in like maybe the town of Willow Creek, or relatives, or what kind of individuals were you sharing your story with?
Well, fellow students at our college, Simpson University.
Oh boy. Okay, in what state?
Well, Simpson University is now in Redding, California, but when we went there, it was in San Francisco.
Okay, gotcha. It very interesting. So I'm trying to put myself in your crew's mindset, because this only happened a few years after the Patterson-Gimlin film footage. So what was it like then, as you continued to grow older? On the one hand, you have Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin, and they have this footage, but then you're like, I've also been there and I've experienced something similar, but yet it's a little different because I don't have the footage. What was that like?
Well, actually, I've accumulated video from other sources of that spot. So in my documentary where I share my tale, I'm actually using footage of the area. And as far as my encounter goes, one of the Monster Quest episodes that talked about Sasquatch recreates an encounter a Native American woman had with her husband. And I say that my encounter was very much like this.
Interesting. So there wasn't any, was there ever any regret, or, I wish if we could have gone back, to that time and that site, we would have done this differently? Or
actually, I just regret that I panicked, that I was hysterical, because I'm a very level-headed person and does not scare easily, but I was utterly terrified. And I had the sense of the presence of evil, and I knew that was irrational, because I think that Sasquatch are just an unknown species of animal, a cryptid that science has not yet admitted to. But there are so many experts in that field, that say the evidence is overwhelming. I'm thinking of people like Grover Krantz, Binder Nagel, and of course, what's his name from Idaho State,
Jeff Meldrum. Yep. Would you ever recommend a group try to do what you guys did back in 1970, where you tried to hike along the creek or in the creek to go up to the film site?
Well, yes and no. You've got to be careful. When I see people trying to find Sasquatch using electronics, things that actually Sasquatch can tell, we're being hunted, and they will not let themselves be discovered. Sasquatch are not quite hermits, but they want to be left alone, and they are incredibly intelligent creatures. And they live in family units, and they honor the family. For example, when Albert Ostman was abducted by a Sasquatch, the Sasquatch took him back to meet the wife and kids.
Have you ever heard of any other instances where that may have also happened, where an individual was introduced to the family, maybe?
Well, I hear on the internet people claiming that they have conversations with Sasquatch, and I'm thinking Sasquatch don't have a larynx, and so they are intelligent enough, though, to have their own speech. But as far as recreating English or any other human language, that is just not possible. So, in other words, I cannot think of the man's name who recorded Sasquatch speech, but there's a recording, and it sounds like gibberish, but it does have syntax, and you can tell that yes, this is a way of communicating.
Ron Moorhead.
Ron Moorhead, that's it. Yes.
So that's really interesting. How is it then? Just curious that we know something like they don't have a larynx if we have never found or captured an actual like type specimen.
Excellent question. I think that it's got to be the fact that the language that they use indicates the lack of a larynx. I'm not an expert, but I'm sure that experts have listened to it.
Interesting.
And
I want to go back a little bit to talking about going up the side of the creek to the film site. Is there any specific advice that you can give to people if they were wanting to try to go up this route?
Yes. Take horses. That will, for some reason, Sasquatch, when they smell horses, they're not afraid of horses. They want to be left alone by people. Sasquatch are different personality types. Humans are encroaching on their environment, and there will come a time, I believe, when Sasquatch are just so tired of being squeezed out and encroached upon that they might lash out. And I'm convinced that our government knows more about them than they're letting on.
It is a very interesting thought to have. But what would you think? What if the group that was going up there didn't have horses and they were just going on foot? Would they have? How much percentage of success might they have if they did not have horses at all?
Virtually none. Now, when people are going out looking for Sasquatch with cameras and things and guns, perhaps Sasquatch know that they're being tracked and they will avoid. But Sasquatch are shown to have interest in human children, especially babies. When Sasquatch look at a car that has a flat tire and the driver is changing the tire, Sasquatch are intrigued by that. There's a place called Oregon Caves. It's just over the north of the state line with California, and there were people hiking, and the man went to urinate, and he walked far off the trail, and when he was doing his business, he saw a Sasquatch watching his wife and child. And he had no sense, he didn't panic like I did, but he had no sense of fear. But he did have a sense that these animals are gentle and curious and deserve their own habitat.
Are you talking about the sighting of that Dr. Matthew Johnson had in 2000, or is this a different account? Just trying.
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
Gotcha.
I don't know his name.
Okay, no problem.
But he was a psychologist.
Yeah, that's Doctor.
Psychiatrist who lived in Alaska.
That's Dr. Matthew Johnson. Absolutely. Yep. Okay. I will try to have that BFRO report in the show notes so people can read that for themselves as well. Because I was like, yeah, I know exactly what he is referring to. So, Don, you've had so many years since that time. Did you ever go out again to try to have another sighting or to, maybe return to this area?
No, I'm not in physical shape now. I'm too old, and I don't have the financial resources to do that.
Sure. Yeah,
I think I'm an armchair explorer.
Yeah, I gotcha. But so I guess maybe another way to say is, after the next year, you didn't have another spring break, and you're like, guys, let's go up to Washington State this time, or there were no other Bigfoot adventures that were had.
No, I did it electronically, but I watch everything on Sasquatch I can get a hold of.
Mm. Did you ever have any conversations about this experience with the friends you had there at a later time in life? You guys met after 10 years and you were like, you remember that time and at the film site?
Yeah, his name was Ken, and we reminisced, and by then our memories, our fear was gone, and looking back at it, our embarrassment was gone, and it was just nice to reminisce.
Do you have any advice for people that are out there in the wilderness? They're trying to have their own interaction with Sasquatch. Do you have any advice for them?
Yes, they are a subspecies of humans. They are not. They don't deserve to be killed and put up as a trophy on a wall, and we need to respect them because they have their own society and their own culture, and they're extremely intelligent. We need to respect them and leave them alone.
Do you think it's worth going to the same area today? Do you think there's still potential Bigfoot activity in the area of Bluff Creek or Willow Creek?
Probably, but there are other areas as well. The most sightings are from, as far as I know, Washington State and British Columbia, Oregon, and less so in Northern California. The next place is actually Southeast Ohio, Northeast Oklahoma, and but the Sasquatch have been seen in every state except Hawaii, every Canadian province and territory. They are all over the place. And in some places they're called brass man or whatever. But sorry, I'm parking here.
Don, is this the first time you've shared this account publicly?
I think a couple of years ago I shared a fraction of what I've shared with you on another podcast. I don't remember which one.
Gotcha. Well, I appreciate you coming on the show to share the whole story. Based on what you experienced, some people classify in their minds as it's some kind of undiscovered great ape, or it's some kind of humanoid that we didn't know is out there. Are you able to classify it in either of those two categories, or you find it's kind of a league of its own type deal?
Well, they have analyzed the DNA. They have sequenced the DNA, and a DNA expert has said that this is a subspecies of human.
referring to the Dr. Melba Ketchum study?
I think that's her name, yeah.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. Yeah, and I think there might be some other information that'll be coming out in future years as well. It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out, but Don, it has been a really interesting conversation with you. It's weird how it's almost like every generation has it. You've had your generation in the 70s, and there was, I don't know if you know this, but there was a group of guys that tried to do this almost same exact thing, hiking up Bluff Creek, actually in the water, just a few years ago. They did not make it, though, because hiking in the creek itself is extremely treacherous. And
cold.
And cold, yeah, definitely. But it was quite the adventure that they had. And no one got hurt, which I think is number one. And no one got hurt on your trip either, correct?
Correct. We were just terrified.
Right. You got another kind of thing to deal with. I would say, I don't know if I would recommend doing this, listeners. It is very treacherous. Anything you hear on the show is pretty dangerous. So keep that in mind. But Don, did you have any closing thoughts or any last thoughts about Bigfoot before we end our time together today?
Yes. Groups that go out there with traps and nets and video equipment, the bigger the group, the less likely they are to run into it. When you put up trail cameras thinking that you're going to spot a Bigfoot, younger Bigfoot might not. Older Bigfoot will recognize the smell of electronics, especially video cameras, and which we can't tell because we've lost most of our senses. But the only time the best groups, 2 or 3, especially having kids with you, that will increase your chances. And just pay attention to where the sightings are, and be nice, and treat them with respect.
I'd say that's great advice, Don. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. It was a privilege to hear your account of what happened back in the 1970s out there by the Patterson-Gimlin film site. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. It's been a pleasure.
Hey, Jeremiah. This is Rory. I left out a couple of things I forgot in our interview that we did. The first thing, I think some of your listeners might be interested in these couple of things, so I thought I'd send you these add-on recordings. The first thing was, I think there was a family of Sasquatch that passed my campsite when I was camped down at Bluff Creek, and I think it was 95. I was about a few hundred yards north of Bigfoot Creek on the sandbar just on the west edge of Bluff Creek. And I had a campfire going, and I don't know, it was 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night. It's really dark. And I'm keeping an eye out 360 degrees for eye shine, always looking for eye shine at night. Mountain lion, bear, and Sasquatch. So I look at one point towards the hillside, which was to the west, and I see what appears to be 3 sets of eye shine, and they're in line, and they appeared to be, going from my left to right, and the first set of eyes was lower than the second set of eyes. And the third set of eye shine was appeared to be smaller and slightly above and behind the second set of eye shine. So what it looked like was a female in front of a male, the female being shorter, and then the male appeared to have a juvenile on its shoulders. Now, do I know? There's no way I could know what it was, but it sure did appear that that's exactly what it was. And they proceeded from my left to my right, and went out of sight. And I don't know. This lasted a few minutes. I think I watched them as they went by. So they were walking by, and keeping an eye on me as they were walking by. So their eyes were focused in my direction most of the time, and I could, see them as they moved. So anyway, that's and this area, where I was camped out was, just downhill, about a quarter of a mile from where I had my 93 campsite encounter. And this is also the area where I found the nest, and all of the broken treetops and twisted trees and bent over trees, that appeared to have been going on for a long time, decades. Some very fresh, and some very old. So anyway, I think it's a pretty good area down there. At least it was, back then. Anyway, I'm going to stop this recording and then send you another one. This is Rory again. This is the other thing that I forgot to mention in our interview. This is in regards to a family that wanted to meet up with me. And I think it was in 95. And I think they went through Al Hodgson, and Al got a hold of me and said, hey, they want to meet up with you and find out, what you've been finding and where you're finding it. And I said, okay. And we made arrangements and met at a restaurant, and they showed up in a camper, and they struck me as odd right off the bat. And it's hard to say, but it kind of looked like three actors that were put together. And the guy, the supposed husband, and maybe they were totally legit a family, but they just struck me as a little bit odd. And the husband definitely looked former military. So anyway, I told them about what I was finding, where I was finding it. They wanted to go. They wanted to see it. So we went, and I'm not sure if it was at this point or the next day, but the guy rented a black Volvo, because I told him we wouldn't be able to get the camper down to the side of Bluff Creek where I was finding everything. So I thought that was completely strange, renting a new black shiny Volvo to go down the switchbacks, which basically the switchback was somewhere between a Jeep trail and a logging road. And so anyway, we camped out the first night near the top of the switchback, I think it was. And we went, I took the guy on a night hike. And, I'd done a lot of night hikes, up in Bluff Creek, 93, 94, 95, 96. And, I don't like to turn on any kind of light or anything. And I basically just adjust my night vision and hike, which, I wouldn't really recommend that. I don't know if I would do it now, looking back, because I did walk up on a bear It's so close to it. It looked like a big giant ink black spot, and it looked out of place, and then it just took off away from me when I got to within about 10 feet of it. So I don't know if I'd recommend doing that. But anyway, we did it, and but he brought a flashlight, and I think this was kind of funny. The flashlight wouldn't stay on for him, which I thought, oh my gosh, that's really this is perfect. He actually got down on his knees and he had to try and get that flashlight going. He did not want to be without light. And it was actually kind of funny. But anyway, so we did the night hike and then we went back and got some rest for the next day. It was uneventful. And so anyway, we take the Volvo down the switchbacks to the area where I was finding all this stuff I was finding. And I mean, the guy drove like a race car driver in this Volvo, this rental Volvo. I mean, it was, I couldn't believe it. It was pretty funny. So anyway, I show him what I had been founding, and he's like, "Yeah, okay, mm-hmm." And so then we're done down there, and we head back up, and I mean, he's driving, like I say, like a dirt car racer up the switchback, and at one point we could hear some damage to the rear end. I mean, bouncing up through the ruts and sliding around the turns. This guy had definitely been professionally trained driver. So we stop the car, we stop the black Volvo, and we get out, and the rear fender is hanging off, and I think it's mostly plastic, maybe some metal, and he tore off the rest of it. So while it was hanging off, he just tore it off and then threw it into the bushes on the side of the switchback. I wouldn't doubt that fender is still sitting on the side of that switchback. So anybody, if they ever go up there, you might find that. But anyway, I just found it was all very odd, and the guy totally struck me as an agent. And they wanted to keep an eye on what was being found, where it was being found, who was finding it, and he completed his mission. He did that, and then they left. So I just kind of filed that under, possibly the 3-letter agencies keeping tabs on the research. Especially in the Bluff Creek area, since that's always been such a hot spot. Anyway, just thought I'd share. Hopefully some of your listeners will find that a little interesting and maybe keep it in mind if they run into similar situations in their research. Okay, talk to you later. Bye.
Just want to take a few minutes to say thank you to you, all my listeners, for listening to the podcast. Please take a minute to help out the show by subscribing on YouTube, making sure you hit the bell so you don't miss any notifications, and share the episode on YouTube with a friend. Also, if you're listening to us on a podcast, thank you so much. Make sure that you're subscribed, share the show with a friend. Really, it's all about sharing the show wherever you can. If you've had a Bigfoot encounter related to the following or know someone who has, please reach out to me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com or pass on my email. Here's a list: the Subtle Lake area of Oregon, Rainbow, Oregon, McKenzie Bridge area, Sweet Home, pretty much that entire area, the north part, if you get what I mean. I'll see you back next time, listeners. Sasquatch Summerfest this year, July 11th through the 12th. It's going to be fantastic. July 11th through 12th in Green Waters Park in Oak Ridge, Oregon. And listeners, if you're going to go, you can get a 2-day ticket for the cost of one. If you use the code BFS, like Bigfoot Society, but BFS, and it'll get you some off your cost. Priscilla was nice enough to provide that for my listeners. So there you go. I look forward to seeing you there. So make sure you head over to www.sasquatchsummerfest.com and pick up your tickets today.